August 11th, 2022. Ashley and Daniel's text messages that morning painted a picture of two people caught up in the rush of a new connection.
Happy I ran into you.
So am I. Since I've met you, you've made everything so much better and bearable. I don't know how to explain it.
Wow, Ashley. You really make it hard not to want you or keep falling for you.
I can't help it.
The words were playful, tender, the kind of exchanges that made Ashley feel wanted and understood.
I can tell how I feel and not worry about your reaction. I feel secure around you. I don't know why, but I just do.
That's how I want you to feel. And I did my job.
Well, that's how you make me feel, so hell yeah, you did your job.
Just know it's gonna be like that. Be yourself, Ashley. I want Ashley, not someone else.
That's all I have to give, is me. No more. No less. I don't have it in me to be pretending. To be something or someone else.
Thanks for being you. Can't wait to see you beautiful.
Me too. Go to bed, darling. Your ass been through enough for the day. Even though I don't want to stop talking to you. But you need to relax a bit.
It started with a message, a simple text from a phone Ashley Bocanegra believed she could trust. At first, nothing about it seemed unusual. The tone felt familiar. The words sounded like Daniel Gonzalez. And in the quiet hours before everything spiraled out of control, Ashley made a decision that would unknowingly place her in the center of a nightmare waiting in the shadows of Gwinnett County. What she didn't know was that investigators would later claim the messages were part of a carefully orchestrated trap. And by the time the truth surfaced, prosecutors would describe the case using chilling words: jealousy, obsession, revenge, and premeditated violence. Police say two women, Antonetta Stevens and Janine Gonzalez, were already waiting before Ashley ever arrived. Hidden behind the appearance of an ordinary meetup was something far darker. Detectives would later uncover surveillance footage, phone records, and videos that painted a disturbing picture of what really happened that night. But this case wasn't just about violence. It was about betrayal between people who once trusted each other, secret conversations, emotional manipulation, and a deadly confrontation that prosecutors argued had been building long before Ashley ever showed up. As investigators dug deeper, the story became even more disturbing. According to court records, the messages sent from Daniel Gonzalez's phone created the illusion that Ashley was walking into a private meeting, but authorities would later allege she was never meant to leave peacefully. Every text, every call, every movement leading up to that moment suddenly became evidence in a case that shocked the local community. Then came the video. Not blurry surveillance footage captured from a distance, not unreliable eyewitness testimony. Investigators say parts of what happened were actually recorded. Footage prosecutors later used inside the courtroom as jurors watched the horrifying chain of events unfold frame by frame. And when detectives finally confronted the people involved, the explanations only raised more questions. Who truly planned the encounter? Who sent the messages? And how did jealousy escalate into a criminal case that would leave one woman fighting for her life while others face the possibility of spending years behind bars? Because beneath the headlines and courtroom arguments was a deeper story, one fueled by emotion, resentment, and the dangerous consequences of revenge. Tonight, we're breaking down the disturbing case of Ashley Bocanegra, the alleged setup that prosecutors say turned into a violent ambush, and the shocking digital evidence that investigators claim exposed everything. This is a story where a single text message changed lives forever. The messages kept coming. At first, Ashley Bocanegra didn't think much about it. The texts coming from Daniel Gonzalez's phone sounded normal enough, casual, familiar, almost comforting. Investigators would later say that was exactly the point. Nothing in those messages suggested danger. Nothing warned her that every response was pulling her closer toward a violent confrontation already taking shape behind the scenes. Hours before the attack, detectives say tension had already been building between multiple people connected through a complicated web of relationships, jealousy, and resentment. Beneath the surface, emotions were boiling over, and according to prosecutors, the anger wasn't sudden, it had been growing quietly for weeks. Friends later told investigators there had been arguments before, accusations, emotional outbursts, social media tension, the kind of drama people often dismiss as personal issues that would eventually cool down on their own. But in this case, police say the conflict was moving toward something much dangerous. Somewhere in Gwinnett County, while Ashley believed she was heading into a private meeting, prosecutors allege Antonetta and Janine Gonzalez were preparing for a confrontation that had already crossed a line. The details investigators uncovered would later become critical inside the courtroom. Phone records showed conversations happening back and forth before Ashley arrived. Detectives would eventually focus heavily on the timing of those communications, who was texting, who was calling, and who may have known exactly what was about to happen. But at the center of everything was one disturbing question. Who was actually sending those messages from Daniel Gonzalez's phone? That question would become one of the most important pieces of the entire case. According to investigators, Ashley had no reason to suspect she was walking into a setup. The messages created a false sense of security, and because they appeared to come directly from someone she trusted, she lowered her guard completely. By the time she arrived at the meeting location, it was already too late. Police say the atmosphere changed almost immediately. What Ashley expected to be a conversation quickly turned tense. Witnesses would later describe shouting, emotional accusations, and chaos unfolding within moments. But investigators say the confrontation didn't happen by accident. Prosecutors argued the encounter had been intentionally engineered from the start. Then the violence began. Authorities later stated that Ashley was attacked during the confrontation while multiple people were present. The situation escalated rapidly, turning from an argument into what prosecutors described as a coordinated assault fueled by jealousy and rage. And then came one of the most chilling parts of the investigation. Someone recorded it. Not a bystander calling for help, not security footage from a distant parking lot. Investigators say portions of the attack itself were captured on video so disturbing that prosecutors would later rely heavily on it during court proceedings. When detectives first reviewed the recordings, they reportedly began piecing together a timeline that contradicted several early statements made by those involved. Every second of footage became evidence, every voice in the background mattered, every movement was analyzed frame by frame. Investigators believe the video revealed not only the violence itself, but the emotional mindset behind it. The recordings allegedly captured taunting, threats, and moments prosecutors argued demonstrated intent rather than panic. That distinction would become incredibly important later in court, because once the attack ended, the case transformed from a personal dispute into a major criminal investigation. Police moved quickly. Detectives interviewed witnesses, collected phones, reviewed text messages, and searched through digital records. As they reconstructed the hours leading up to the attack, investigators say the evidence painted a disturbing picture of manipulation and planning. The text messages became central to everything. According to authorities, the phone conversations leading Ashley to the location appeared strategic, almost calculated. Investigators would later question whether the messages were specifically designed to isolate her and create the perfect opportunity for confrontation. And the deeper detectives looked, the more complicated the relationships became. There were claims of betrayal, romantic tension, personal grudges, people taking sides behind closed doors. What initially appeared to be a spontaneous fight now looked, at least to prosecutors, like something much more deliberate. Meanwhile, Ashley was left dealing with the physical and emotional aftermath of the attack. As news of the incident spread through the local community, reactions were immediate. Many were shocked by the allegations, but what disturbed people most was the existence of the video evidence. Rumors circulated quickly online. Some questioned how an argument could spiral so violently. Others wondered whether the confrontation had been planned all along. But investigators weren't relying on rumors. They were building a case. Inside interview rooms, detectives began confronting the people involved separately, comparing statements against digital evidence and recorded footage. And according to investigators, inconsistencies started appearing almost immediately. Some stories changed. Some details didn't match the timeline. And some explanations became harder to believe once detectives compared them against what was allegedly shown in the recordings. Then, investigators uncovered another troubling detail. Authorities believed the use of Daniel Gonzalez's phone may have been intentional from the very beginning. Prosecutors later argued the messages gave Ashley a false sense of trust, a tactic that made it easier to lure her into a vulnerable situation without resistance. If true, it meant the attack may not have been driven by sudden emotion alone. It may have been orchestrated. As the criminal investigation intensified, prosecutors prepared to present the case before a jury. Detectives organized digital evidence, witness statements, surveillance material, and the now infamous video recordings that had become the backbone of the investigation. And while the public only knew fragments of the story, those closest to the case understood something chilling. This wasn't just a fight fueled by jealousy anymore. This was a case prosecutors believed involved deception, planning, and a violent ambush disguised as a normal meeting. But the most explosive revelations were still ahead, because once the case finally entered the courtroom, jurors would see evidence that prosecutors claimed exposed exactly what happened that night, and the defense would begin fighting away the recordings that seemed impossible to ignore. And for Ashley Bocanegra, the moment she answered those text messages had already changed her life forever. By the time the case reached court, the atmosphere inside the courtroom had already become tense. Reporters filled the gallery. Family members sat quietly on opposite sides of the room, avoiding eye contact. Prosecutors carried stacks of printed messages, photographs, and digital records they believed would expose how a personal conflict spiraled into violence. But everyone knew the most important piece of evidence wasn't sitting inside a folder. It was the video. Even before jurors saw it, the footage had already become the center of the entire case. Investigators believed it revealed not only what happened during the confrontation, but the emotional state of the people involved. Prosecutors were prepared to argue that the recordings proved the attack was far more than a sudden fight between angry individuals. According to court testimony, the events leading up to Ashley Bocanegra's arrival that night in Gwinnett County began long before that night. Detectives explained how they reconstructed the timeline using phone data, messages, and witness interviews. Jurors listened carefully as prosecutors described the alleged deception involving Daniel Gonzalez's phone. They argued Ashley was intentionally led into a dangerous situation under false pretenses, believing she was meeting someone she trusted while others were already preparing for confrontation. Then prosecutors displayed the text messages. One after another, conversations appeared on large courtroom screens. The tone sounded casual at first, nothing openly threatening, nothing that would immediately alarm someone reading them. But prosecutors argued that was exactly why the messages worked. They claimed the communication was designed to lower Ashley's guard. As jurors examined the exchanges, prosecutors emphasized timing. They pointed out when messages were sent, where phones were located, and how certain communications allegedly overlapped with movements made by Antonetta Stevens and Janine Gonzalez before the encounter. The courtroom became silent as investigators described how quickly the situation escalated once Ashley arrived. Then came the video evidence. According to journalists present during the proceedings, the atmosphere inside the courtroom shifted immediately when the footage began playing. Some jurors reportedly stared without moving. Others avoided looking directly at the screen during the most disturbing moments. Prosecutors argued the recordings showed aggression that went far beyond a heated argument. They claimed the footage captured a coordinated attack fueled by anger and revenge. At several points, prosecutors paused the video to highlight specific actions, statements, and reactions they believed demonstrated intent. For the defense, the challenge became enormous. Attorneys representing the accused attempted to frame the confrontation differently. They argued emotions were running high, tensions exploded unexpectedly, and the situation spiraled out of control in the heat of the moment. According to the defense, the incident was chaotic, emotional, and far more complicated than prosecutors suggested. But prosecutors kept returning to one issue: the setup. They argued the use of Daniel Gonzalez's phone was not accidental. Investigators believed Ashley would never have willingly walked into the situation had she known who was truly waiting for her. Prosecutors described the messages as bait, part of a deliberate effort to lure her into a vulnerable position. And then another disturbing detail surfaced during testimony. Investigators revealed that after the attack, some individuals allegedly attempted to minimize what had happened. Prosecutors argued that certain statements made afterward conflicted heavily with the evidence collected at the scene and the recordings investigators obtained. To detectives, those contradictions mattered, because in many violent crime investigations, prosecutors often look beyond the act itself. They study behavior before and after the incident. They analyze whether suspects appeared panicked, remorseful, or calculating. And according to prosecutors in this case, several actions taken afterward raised additional concerns about intent and accountability. As the trial continued, jurors heard emotional testimony about the aftermath Ashley faced following the assault. Prosecutors detailed the physical injuries and emotional trauma connected to the attack. The courtroom reportedly became emotional at several points as witnesses described the fear, confusion, and chaos from that night. Meanwhile, outside court, public attention surrounding the case continued growing online. Many people became fixated on the disturbing role technology played in the incident. Social media users discussed how a trusted phone number became the tool prosecutors say was used to lure someone into danger. Others focused on the video evidence itself, shocked that such critical moments were allegedly recorded at all. Legal analysts following the case noted how digital evidence had become increasingly important in modern criminal investigations. Text messages, call records, GPS data, and videos often reveal timelines that witness testimony alone cannot fully explain. And in this case, prosecutors appeared determined to build their entire narrative around those digital breadcrumbs. But despite the evidence, the defense continued fighting aggressively. Attorneys questioned witness credibility. They challenged interpretations of the footage. They argued prosecutors were presenting a one-sided version of emotionally charged events. The defense insisted the situation was more complex than a planned ambush and warned jurors against allowing emotion to outweigh reasonable doubt. Still, prosecutors believed the evidence spoke for itself. As closing arguments approached, they reminded jurors of the sequence investigators had carefully reconstructed: the messages from Daniel Gonzalez's phone, Ashley arriving under false assumptions, the confrontation waiting for her, and the violent encounter captured on video. According to prosecutors, none of it was random. Every step connected. Every decision led towards that moment. And now the jury faced the responsibility of deciding whether the attack was truly spontaneous or the result of a deliberate setup fueled by jealousy and revenge. Inside the courtroom, tension became unbearable as deliberations began. Hours passed, then more hours. Families waited nervously in silence, knowing the verdict would permanently alter multiple lives. For Ashley Bocanegra, the case had already left emotional scars that would never fully disappear. But for the accused, everything now depended on what 12 jurors believed happened that night. And when the jury finally returned to the courtroom, the outcome would bring one chapter of the case to an end, while raising even deeper questions about betrayal, obsession, and how quickly personal conflicts can become deadly. The courtroom was silent when the final jury walked back in. No one moved. For days, jurors had listened to testimony about secret messages, emotional betrayal, digital evidence, and the violent confrontation prosecutors claimed had been carefully orchestrated. They had watched disturbing video footage frame by frame. They had heard detectives explain timelines, phone records, and the alleged deception involving Daniel Gonzalez's phone. And now, after hours of deliberation, everyone inside that courtroom in Gwinnett County understood that the next few minutes would decide the future of everyone involved. Ashley Bocanegra sat quietly as the verdict forms were handed to the judge. Across the room, Antonetta Stevens and Janine Gonzalez waited beside their attorneys, their expressions tense and unreadable. Family members held their breath. Some stared at the floor. Others looked directly toward the jury, searching for any clue about what was about to happen. Then the clerk began reading the verdicts aloud. One by one, the decisions echoed through the courtroom. According to prosecutors, the evidence had proven that Ashley was lured into a dangerous confrontation through manipulation and deception. The state argued the use of Daniel Gonzalez's phone was central to the setup, allowing Ashley to believe she was walking into a normal meeting rather than an ambush waiting behind closed doors. Jurors ultimately sided with much of the prosecution's case. As the verdicts were read, emotions inside the courtroom immediately erupted. Some people cried quietly, others lowered their heads in disbelief. The reality of the situation finally became permanent. What began as jealousy and personal conflict had now transformed into criminal convictions that would follow everyone involved for the rest of their lives. But even after the verdict, the disturbing questions surrounding the case never fully disappeared. Investigators had spent months reconstructing the timeline, yet many people still wondered what was happening emotionally behind the scenes before the attack ever occurred. How long had the anger been building? Who first suggested confronting Ashley? At what moment did the situation cross from emotional conflict into criminal intent? Those answers remain buried somewhere inside private conversations, deleted messages, and the complicated emotions connecting everyone involved. During sentencing hearings, prosecutors revisited the brutality of the attack and the emotional trauma left behind afterward. They argued the violence was not simply an impulsive argument that spiraled out of control. According to the state, the evidence showed planning, coordination, and deliberate actions designed to place Ashley in a vulnerable position. But the defense, however, continued insisting the case had been emotionally charged from the beginning. Attorneys argued that jealousy, heartbreak, and personal betrayal had created a volatile situation where emotions exploded beyond control. They maintained that the prosecution had interpreted the events in the harshest possible light. But by then, the videos, messages, and witness testimony had already shaped the jury's view of what happened. And for many following the case, the most unsettling part remained the digital trail. A phone, a series of texts, a trusted contact name appearing on a screen. That was all it took. Investigators repeatedly emphasized how modern technology played a major role in this case. In earlier decades, a setup like this might have relied on handwritten notes or word of mouth. But now, prosecutors argued, deception could happen instantly through a single message sent from the right device at the right time. Ashley believed she was responding to someone familiar. Instead, prosecutors said, she was unknowingly walking toward violence. As coverage of the case spread online, many people began debating the broader issues surrounding it. Some discussed toxic relationships and emotional manipulation. Others focused on the dangerous role jealousy can play when anger is allowed to grow unchecked. And many were disturbed by how quickly personal resentment escalated into physical violence severe enough to become a major criminal case. For Ashley Bocanegra, surviving the attack meant living with the aftermath long after the headlines faded away. Court cases eventually end, sentences are handed down, news coverage moves on. But for victims, the emotional consequences often continue for years. Trust becomes difficult, fear lingers. Ordinary moments can suddenly trigger memories connected to trauma, and while the courtroom might deliver legal closure, emotional closure is far more complicated. Meanwhile, for Antonetta Stevens and Janine Gonzalez, the consequences became part of permanent public record. Their names became forever tied to a case built around jealousy, betrayal, and violence captured on video. And in many ways, that video changed everything. Without the recordings, the investigation might have looked very different. Witnesses might have contradicted each other, stories could have shifted more dramatically over time. But prosecutors believed the footage gave jurors something powerful, a direct window into the confrontation itself. Not rumors, not speculation, evidence. As investigators later reflected on the case, many pointed to the disturbing progression that unfolded step by step. What started as emotional tension evolved into secret communication. That communication allegedly became manipulation, and eventually, according to prosecutors, manipulation turned into violence. A chain reaction, one decision leading to another, one text message opening the door to irreversible consequences. And perhaps that is what makes this case so unsettling. Because at the beginning, nothing looked extraordinary. There were no flashing warning signs, no public indication that the situation was heading toward criminal violence, just relationship drama, emotional conflict, and private resentment hidden behind phone screens and closed conversations. Until suddenly, it wasn't private anymore. Police lights, interrogations, courtrooms, evidence videos, criminal charges. Lives permanently changed. In the end, the case of Ashley Bocanegra became more than just another violent crime investigation in Gwinnett County. It became a chilling example of how deception, obsession, and uncontrolled anger can escalate into something devastatingly real. And it all started with a text message.